The border alarm at Hollow Creek Settlement had been silent for 6 days when 3-year-old Lily Alvarez slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence her mother had been meaning to report for a week, wandered past the tree line nobody had bothered warning a toddler about, and walked directly into the middle of the single most contested, most heavily fortified demilitarized zone on the entire planet of Corvus Minor. Neither the Corrali nor the NASEC forces occupying that zone noticed her immediately. Both factions had spent the preceding 11 years locked in a slow, grinding territorial war over Corvus Minor's rare mineral deposits, a conflict that had, by that point, reduced the contested strip between their fortified lines to a churned, cratered stretch of no man's land neither side had set foot on in months, each preferring the safety of long-range bombardment to the risk of close engagement. It was Corrali Private Ussa Renth, manning the eastern observation post on a routine sensor sweep, who spotted the small, unmistakably human shape moving through the wreckage first, small enough and slow enough that her sensor initially flagged it as an animal before the resolution sharpened, and her own breath caught hard in her throat. "Command," she said, voice cracking with a panic her training had never once prepared her for. "I have a visual on a human child." Repeat, a human child alone in the contested zone, approximately 200 meters from the NASEC line. The response from Corrali Command was immediate and, by the standards of an 11-year war fought almost entirely through artillery exchanges and strategic feints, entirely unprecedented. "Hold all fire in Sector 7. Confirm visual. Do not, under any circumstances, allow ordnance into that sector until further notice." On the NASEC side of the line, Sergeant Dral Kesson received nearly identical orders within 90 seconds, relayed from a soldier whose own sensor sweep had caught the same small shape, moving unsteadily across the cratered ground, weaving between debris with the particular aimless, curious wandering of a child who had absolutely no understanding of the danger she had walked into. Dral had fought in this war for 6 years. He had watched friends die to Corrali artillery, had ordered strikes himself that he suspected, though he had never confirmed, killed Corrali soldiers no older than his own younger brother back home. He had never, in 6 years, given an order to hold fire for any reason beyond tactical repositioning. "She is a child," he said to his own second, watching the small figure through his scope with a tightness building in his chest that had nothing to do with combat readiness at all. An unarmed, unaccompanied human child, walking directly through an active engagement zone. "Get me eyes on both flanks. I want to know the moment either side so much as considers using ordnance while she's out there, because I will personally see any soldier who fires into that sector on either side of this line. Answer for it." What neither commander fully understood yet in those first frantic minutes was that Lily Alvarez had wandered into the contested zone not out of any child's careless disregard for danger, but because she had spotted from the settlement's edge a small orange flower growing amid the wreckage, one of the few splashes of color left in a landscape both warring factions had spent 11 years reducing to gray rubble, and had simply, with the single-minded focus only a 3-year-old possesses, decided she wanted it. Maria Alvarez discovered her daughter missing at 6:14 settlement time, 6 minutes after Lily slipped through the fence gap, and the 11 minutes that followed would remain, for the rest of her life, the single longest stretch of time she ever experienced, a frantic search through the settlement's narrow streets that ended, with a horror that nearly buckled her knees entirely at the sight of the gap in the perimeter fence and the small, unmistakable footprints leading through it into the contested zone beyond. "She's out there," Maria told the settlement's small civilian defense coordinator, a retired soldier named Tomas Ferreira who had, until that exact moment, spent the war years grateful the settlement sat far enough back from the front line to avoid direct involvement. "My daughter is out there, Tomas, in the middle of that, and I don't care what protocol says about civilian movement near the line. I am going after her." "You'll be shot before you clear the tree line," Tomas said, already moving toward the settlement's emergency comm station rather than trying to physically stop her, understanding, with the particular clarity of a man who had once had children of his own, that no protocol on record was going to hold Maria Alvarez back regardless of what he said. Let me try the emergency channel first. Both factions monitor it, even now. If there's any chance at all of reaching someone with authority to actually stop the fighting, that's faster than you running in there unarmed and getting both of you killed. It was that emergency broadcast, relayed simultaneously to both Corrali and NASEC command frequencies, in a desperate, unpolished transmission that Tomas Ferreira would later admit he composed in under 30 seconds, that transformed what had begun as two separate, uncoordinated holds on fire into something considerably more significant. "This is Hollow Creek Civilian Defense," Tomas said, voice tight but steady, broadcasting on a frequency both warring factions had, for 11 years, used almost exclusively to negotiate prisoner exchanges and formal ceasefire terms. "A human child has wandered into the contested zone. She is unarmed, alone, and has no understanding of the danger she is in. I am asking both factions, on behalf of this settlement, to hold all fire in that sector until she can be safely recovered. I do not know if either side will hear this in time. I am asking anyway, because I do not know what else there is left to do." Usa Renth heard it first, relayed through her own command channel with an urgency that matched exactly what she'd already been feeling watching the small figure move through her scope. And it was Usa herself, against every standing order her training had ever drilled into her, who made the decision that would eventually be studied, debated, and eventually celebrated across both factions' military academies for a generation afterward. "Command, I am moving to retrieve the child," she said, already climbing over her own position's forward barrier, weapons slung and safetied, hands raised where any observer, Corrali or NASEC, could see them clearly. "I understand this violates standing engagement protocol. I am requesting explicit authorization to cross the contested line under a flag of non-combat intent, and if that authorization does not come in the next 30 seconds, I am going anyway. Because I am not willing to watch a child die out there, while this war decides whether saving her fits inside the rules." On the opposite line, Drow Kessin watched the small Corrali figure emerge from her own fortified position, weapons slung, hands raised, moving toward the child with the same desperate urgency he felt building in his own chest, and made, in the span of perhaps 3 seconds, the decision that would define the rest of his military career, far more than any battle he had fought in the preceding 6 years. "Hold all NASEC fire across the entire sector," he said, already vaulting his own position's barrier. "I am moving to support the Corrali soldier currently crossing toward the child. Any soldier on this line who fires a single shot while I am out there will answer to me personally, and I promise you, that conversation will be considerably worse than anything Corrali High Command could threaten you with." What followed, according to the accounts later given by soldiers on both sides of the line, none of whom had ever expected to describe a moment of the war in quite these terms, was something that neither faction's 11 years of grinding, bitter conflict had produced even once before. Two soldiers from opposing armies, moving across the same shattered ground that had claimed hundreds of lives between them, converging on a small human child who had, by the time they reached her, finally succeeded in picking the orange flower she'd wandered out to find and was holding it up, delighted, entirely unaware of the two armed strangers approaching from opposite directions, or of the war that had, for the span of perhaps 4 minutes, gone completely, unprecedentedly silent around her. Usa Renth reached her first, dropping to one knee in the churned mud, and found herself, to her own considerable surprise, unable to say anything at all for several seconds, simply staring at this small, fearless, entirely unharmed child who had wandered, alone, through the deadliest stretch of ground on the entire planet, and emerged from it caring about nothing more urgent than the flower in her small hand. "Hi," Lily said, holding the flower up toward the strange, armored soldier kneeling in front of her with the same open, trusting friendliness she offered every stranger she'd ever met. Pretty. Yes, Ussa managed, something breaking loose in her chest that she would spend months afterward trying to fully understand. Very pretty. Can I help you get home now? I think your mother is very worried about you. It was Drow Kessin, arriving seconds later, who lifted the child himself, settling her against one armored shoulder with the careful, practiced gentleness of a man who had, Ussa would later learn, 3 younger siblings back home he'd helped raise, and it was the image of a Nasek sergeant carrying a human child back toward the settlement's tree line, flanked by a Korali private who had crossed an active war zone to reach her, that a settlement drone operator happened to capture on camera. Footage that would, within a week, circulate across both factions' home broadcasts and force a reckoning neither military command had been prepared for. We have fought this war for 11 years over mineral rights neither side has fully extracted in that time, Korali High Marshal Vesa Thorn would say, in the formal ceasefire address delivered 6 weeks later, standing before an assembled crowd that included both Ussa Renth and Drow Kessin, invited specifically as guests of honor. We told ourselves across all those years that the stakes were too significant to abandon, that retreat meant weakness, that peace meant admitting the cost already paid had purchased nothing at all. It took a single human child, wandering fearlessly into the middle of everything we had built this war around, and 2 soldiers from opposing armies choosing, in the same instant, that her life mattered more than any territorial claim either faction had ever fought to defend, to show this marshal exactly how thin the reasons for our continued fighting had actually become. I do not know if peace was always possible. I know only that it took watching 2 enemies become, however briefly, allies in service of a stranger's child, to make this marshal finally willing to try. Maria Alvarez, reunited with her daughter within the hour, would later describe the moment Drow Kessin placed Lily back into her arms as the only part of that entire day she could remember with any real clarity, everything before it a blur of terror, everything after it consumed by a gratitude she found herself, for months afterward, unable to fully put into words. "Thank you," she told the 2 soldiers, unable to manage anything more articulate in the moment, and it was Ussa Renth, still faintly trembling from the adrenaline of the crossing, who answered for both of them. "We did not do this for you," Ussa said. "Or not only for you. I think, watching her out there, both of us understood something at the exact same moment, on opposite sides of a line we've spent our whole careers being told was the only thing that mattered. I don't know how to explain it better than that. She just wanted a flower. She had no idea what she'd walked into. And somehow that made it impossible for either of us to keep pretending our reasons for fighting were bigger than the reason we both had to stop." The peace that followed, negotiated over the following 8 months and formalized in a treaty that Corvith Miners' history books would come to call, simply, the Flower Accord, redistributed the contested mineral rights through joint extraction rather than exclusive territorial control. A compromise that satisfied neither faction's original war aims entirely, but that both, by the treaty's signing, had come to genuinely prefer to 11 more years of grinding, purposeless conflict. Lily Alvarez, 7 years old by the time the treaty's 10th anniversary arrived, was invited to the commemorative ceremony held at the exact site of the contested zone, now converted into a shared memorial garden planted, at both factions' joint insistence, with the same small orange flowers that had once grown wild amid the wreckage. And it was Drow Kessin, considerably grayer now, retired from active service, who knelt beside her the way he had knelt beside her 7 years earlier, and asked her gently whether she remembered any of it at all. A little, Lily admitted, studying the flowers with the same open curiosity she'd shown them as a toddler. "I remember it was scary after. Mom cried a lot, but I mostly just remember wanting the flower, and then 2 nice soldiers helped me get home." That is, I think, A perfectly fair thing to remember, Drow said, and found, watching her reach for one of the memorial garden's flowers with the same fearless delight she'd shown 7 years earlier, that he was smiling in a way his own soldiers, back when this war had still owned every hour of his life, would scarcely have recognized. For what it's worth, small one, you accomplished more in 11 minutes of wandering after a flower than either of our armies accomplished in 11 years of trying to kill each other over the ground it was growing in. I think that might be the most important lesson either side ever actually learned out here.